Hey, now it's Brace for Impact, and I'm your host, Mike Gilbert, and I'm going solo on that ass, but it's still the same. We're talking some TNA wrestling, and not a ton of news to talk about this week. Oh, excuse me, let me get my back. Oh, not a ton of news to talk about this week. And I'm gonna start the show off with a couple of minor. It's depending on the audience. It could be minor, or it could be major. The news is already out there. It's already all over the internet. So, we're going to go ahead and lead off with that. And so if you don't want any type of I'm not going to give you match results. So if you don't want any type of spoilers whatsoever, fast forward a few minutes. Because I do feel like we need to get into what happened at the TV taping last night, and it's related to NXT crossover. So if you're not into that stuff, you want to be surprised, you want to be completely shocked, and you have not been on social media or any websites or anything where all this news is already all over the place, feel free to dip out right now and come back a little later. But we're gonna go ahead and get into it. And if you guys are in the chat and you want to give your thoughts on it, please let me know. And we'll try to get to it. I love the interaction with everybody in the chat, especially my Patreon peeps. I appreciate you guys. But so last night the NXT crossover with TNA continued, and I gotta say I really like what they're doing with this crossover. JD and I got into it a little bit on Thursday night. And I think a lot of people want to compare this current crossover with NXT to the crossover that happened between AEW and Impact Wrestling back in the day with the Kenny Omega. They're not even comparable, to be honest with you. They're not even. They're like in the same. It's like the same league, but not like in the same ballpark. If that makes any sense. AEW sent their World Heavyweight Champion to Impact, and their World Heavyweight Champion came in and popped business like they had not seen an Impact in a long, long time. To this day, the episode that Kenny Omega debuted on Impact Wrestling is the highest rated episode of Impact Wrestling on Access that there's ever been. They've not been able to surpass that. And if you take his average numbers, they far surpass anything they've done outside. The only person that comes close, and I hate to say this because it's going to make Lucha Doncic happy, is Tessa Blanchard when she was the world champion. Now they were regularly doing, in and around 200,000 viewers during that time period. And then the pandemic hit, and then everything went to shit. And then, so they were not able to recapture those numbers until Kenny Omega came in. And so the two aren't even comparable. Okay. Because that isn't what's happening with the NXT crossover and the WWE partnership, because WWE is not sending their World Heavyweight Champion over to become the World Heavyweight Champion here and doing all that. They're not, while business seems to be up a little bit right now, at least definitely better than what they were doing in Cincinnati. The two can't even be compared. And so I think everybody needs to stop comparing about what happened with AEW partnership to what's going on with the current NXT partnership. The positive with the AEW partnership was that, obviously business went up and they got way more notoriety. It was a big deal. And they got Kenny Omega matches on their show. And he was a draw for them. He was a big star. And that was great. The downside of that relationship is that it created it was really toxic between the two fan bases, and because AEW fans did not want AEW to mingle with TNA. They kept snubbing their nose at Impact Wrestling and saying that, it's a waste of time, it's beneath them, it's this whole thing. And you really started to see like the snobbery of that fan base. And that's a legitimate thing. And I experienced that when I went to WrestleMania a couple years ago in LA. There's like this snobbery there, and every fan base has it, but the AEW ones they're weird, I would say. So you really saw that. And then of course it didn't help matter as much with Tony Khan coming on the show and burying Impact on their own program, and then Impact not ever responding. And I contend to this day that's not Tony Khan's fault. That's Impact's fault. They allowed that to happen, and then they never ended up paying it off. They didn't have a plan to pay it off, and it just never ended up working out. So, so that whole thing, that part of it sucked. But they brought in their biggest star. They gave Impact their biggest star, and he was a fixture on the program for months, and he popped business like nobody else was able to do. And then they haven't been able to recapture since then. So it's a completely different thing. With this NXT crossover, it's a more mutually beneficial partnership. Everybody's getting something out of it, and nobody questions like, hey, what is NXT getting out of this relationship? Nobody does that. There are some people out there that aren't watching NXT and that aren't watching TNA that want to say that TNA is getting screwed, and they're completely wrong. They're so wrong about that. It is they're wild how wrong they are about it. They're legitimately making stuff up. And everybody wants to say, oh well, man, TNA is just getting screwed over here. It's like, no, you guys, you're completely wrong. Here's the thing: what TNA likes out of this relationship is they love the fact that their name is being chanted on WWE television, that their stars are being put on WWE television, and now it's starting to happen more. Last night we got to see some stars jump over, cross the line, and come into TNA, and they're actually doing some more matches. Now we got Tatum Paxley at the pay-per-view, but nobody knew who that was, but that was like a good match, and that was cool. Well, last night on the Impact taping, so this is the spoiler, guys. So if you don't want the spoiler, move on. But last night, Charles Dempsey showed up on NXT or showed up on TNA. So NXT's Charles Dempsey or Charlie Dempsey. What was his name? Charlie or Charles? I can't remember. Showed up on TNA, and he ended up doing an angle, and then he ended up having a match, and it looks like it's going to carry over into the tapings tonight. Obviously, I'm recording this on Saturday morning, so we don't know, but yeah, that is Lord Steven Regal's kid. So that's a cool thing, and I think fans are going to be excited about that. Also, somebody named Izzy Dame, whom I've never heard of, and I could not pick her out of a lineup, but she was also on the show. So there's more crossover coming, and I like the crossover that they're doing. It doesn't create like the NX. I think there's more. I don't think I think there's more crossover between WWE and TNA as far as fans go than there was for AEW and TNA, because I felt like there was this resentment from the TNA fan side, even when AEW was created, because it was born out of like Ring of Honor and stuff like that. So it was just like this weird rivalry between, and then AEW immediately became so successful, and while TNA was struggling really bad. TNA had left Spike, and then they kept going from station to station to station, getting less and less viewership, and they were kind of in the dumps whenever AEW was created. Whenever AEW was created, they were just coming off of Pursuit, and TNA was about to go to Access TV, but they had spent that year on Pursuit, and it was a tough year, and they're wrestling in the dark in front of nobody. It's like a tough time if you're a TNA fan. And then you got these guys, AEW, coming in with all this money and being put on a bigger channel than TNA ever had on TNT. Getting that first episode of Dynamite got like 1.4 million, and they were a legit competitor at one point. Like, they were closing the gap between WWE. Now that gap is humongous now, but there was like a time period where they're actually closing the gap where TNA could never close the gap with WWE. And AEW was able to sell way more pay-per-views than TNA had ever imagined. They, like, their entire existence, they never reached 100,000. They just couldn't. And AEW is doing over 100,000 pay-per-view buys and doing 10,000 seat arenas and selling them out quick. And TNA never could do that. And I think the fan base kind of resented AEW for that, because they immediately came in like TNA is like now an afterthought. And then AEW comes over and they're treating Impact like shit. And so the fan bases just didn't click. TNA fans didn't really like AEW, and AEW fans didn't really like TNA. And so like it just never clicked. I think that that the styles mesh are more comparable with TNA and NXT. And I think like there's some TNA fans that are already watching NXT. So I think that's why this thing is working out so well. The only people that don't like the partnership are the people that aren't watching. The only people that think that the partnership isn't going well are the people that aren't watching. And so this is one of those things that's like a mutually beneficial thing. But yeah, we got more NXT crossover happening in Impact Wrestling.